everyone to our joint webinar on spirituality and mental health. How do we best support our students? So just a quick note about logistics. If you're listening in on the webinar with your phone, please mute your phone line and be sure to turn off your computer speakers. I think everything's under control though because I'm not hearing any screeching, so that's usually a good sign. And for those of you who are listening in on your computer or tablet, your audio will automatically be muted. So today's webinar is facilitated by Reverend Ellie Hummel, who you've heard on the line already. Hi, Ellie, my neighbor from across, just down the street here, and Dr. Tayeb Rashid, who you've also heard on the line, and myself, Dr. Lena DiGenova. So Ellie is a co-chair of the Spirituality and Religious Pluralism Community of Practice, as well as a chaplain and coordinator of Concordia University's Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center in Montreal. Bonjour, Ellie. And Tayeb and I are co-chairs of the Campus Mental Health Community of Practice. Tayeb is from the University of Toronto, Scarborough, and I'm Lena DiGenova, as I just mentioned, from McGill University. So I don't know if you want to say hello, Tayeb. We heard you on the line earlier, but can you hear you again?
Yes, this is Tayeb from University of Toronto, Scarborough, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all on this joint webinar from two community of practice, campus mental health and spirituality. My only tagline is there are so many ways of healing and there's so many therapeutic potentials. Even though I'm a clinical psychologist, I think by tapping into different resources, which you're going to hear today, we actually increase our visibility, our reach to students. Without further ado, I hand over to Lena and Ali for what I'm hoping it will be a wonderful, wonderful and enlightening presentation, and we'll be able to take some questions, Ali, towards the end.
Yeah, at the end we'll have time for conversation, and that's actually interesting. So Lena is going to tell you what we're doing, but there will be questions and also...
But before I tell you what we're doing, I'm delighted to also present to you today some campus partners from across the country who will be sharing their stories. We have Carlene Gardner and Erin Johns from McGill. We have Victor Thomas from Simon Fraser University and Calvary DeJong from Red River College Student Association, who's also affiliated with the University of Saskatchewan. So welcome and thank you. So we have, now that we thought we would start off with a short poll. We were kind of blown away when we learned late last week that there were over 75 registrants for this webinar. We were so excited because what we realized was that what started off as a very casual conversation about how we can all connect together really came about, turned into this joint webinar. And what we realized was that so many other folks across the country were excited to talk about this with us. So now that you know who we are, we thought we would have a short poll for you. So I hand it over to Ellie.
So our first poll, oh my gosh, now I have to manage technology. Here. Which of the following, so you should see it on your screen, so which of the following would best describe you? We're interested in knowing whether you're a mental health professional, student affairs, work in the general area of spiritual and religious practice, or if any students are there. So just put it in. Looks like we're about half of us are in the mental health profession. It's changing. All right. We'll give you a few. Do you all see the poll? Should be on your screen. So we'll give you a few more seconds. No students. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So shall we? That's good. Shall we end the poll? It's voluntary. It's a fun way to get to know each other. So let's end it. So we have actually a lot of student affairs and mental health professionals, and about, it just disappeared. There we go. And about just under 30% of spiritual and religious professionals. So we have a great mix. So thanks for participating in that.
Yeah, thank you. Now that we're better acquainted, we thought we would provide you with a brief overview of our interactive webinar. There will be more polls and opportunities for exchanges. So over the next 50 minutes, we will discuss the current landscape of post-secondary student mental health, including the reality of our daily work, followed by a brief overview of the connection between mental health and spirituality. As mentioned earlier, we will also be joined by participant stories who will share information about their counseling, mental health services, and their spiritual health services on campus. These stories will include best practices, overcoming potential stereotypes, and how they have worked through them to build relationships with their partners. So throughout this webinar, you will be invited to provide your input, share your questions, and your stories. We thought, Ellie, Tayab, and I, when we first started to talk about this webinar, we thought it would be helpful to begin by providing some context about post-secondary student mental health. And over the last decade, there has been a significant increase in the demand for student mental health supports, coupled with complexity and severity of symptoms. And Tayab, please feel free to join in. Certainly this touches your work, but we wanted to share with you just a brief slide of what it looks like and the data looks like. So what we have here is some results from the 2016 Canadian National College Health Assessment. And here what we see is that 1 in 5 students were diagnosed or treated within the last year for a mental health concern. And over 90% of students reported feeling overwhelmed by all they had to do within the last year. Interestingly, over 20% of students also reported that stress, anxiety, sleep, and depression had a tangible impact on their academic performance, such as failing a class or having a midterm or having to miss classes altogether. So the increase in student distress, though, has also had a significant impact on student service delivery and units across the country. We hear often that there have been a lot of they have been taxing, the resources are all tapped out and have been taxed, and that's been prompting many post-secondary institutions to implement a more systemic approach to support our student well-being. And Tayab, I'd like for you to maybe just share with the group a little bit about the Wi-Fi symbol, which is what we've been calling it since you work so much on it, which is the Caucus and the CMHA Post-Secondary Student Mental Health Guide.
Thank you, Lena. So two comments before I address Lena's most recent comment about the Wi-Fi diagram. Lena very succinctly presented the 1 in 5. That is true, and some of you might be thinking, is this 1 in 5 because there is more concerted effort to bring mental health awareness and potentially decreasing of stigma? I have sort of monitored the data from last 5 years at our own campus of counseling services, and we controlled for the number of students, total number of students entered, and then we see is there more more students are coming because they then aim more students on campus, or there's also more information. So when even you statistically control for the XX factor or decrease of stigma factor, you still see more students coming for mental health services, and these services are the concerns they're bringing are becoming more complex, more chronic, and the acuteness is increasing. So that's a sort of a summary of it. In fact, we have hopefully we'll be having a webinar on that specific issues soon. Lena mentioned about the Wi-Fi diagram. Caucus and CMHA worked on a systemic guide to post-secondary mental health, which was launched in 2013, and then we'll send you some resources as well. Then you can see the diagram, and it starts from the top where most students, which applies to most students about the policies and framework, then slowly comes down just like a pyramid, but rather than a peak up, it's a peak down. The last thing is crisis, and in between is mental health awareness and accessibility. So it's if you look at that diagram, it basically the gist of this diagram is mental health is not just one responsibility of one service or one segment of the campus. It's the way I frame it, mental health is a health issue, which significantly, as Lena mentioned, significantly impacts academics. So if it is a health issue, there are so many different ways to deal with it, and I'm turning back to Lena and Ali to tell you about what could be the role of spirituality, and then we'll hear from different campus stories.
Thank you, Tayyab. And so, in addition to the student context, we wanted to also share today the context of our work and the reality of our work. So, over to you, Ellie, for our next poll.
So we have a poll coming up, and Nicole, who's, by the way, our techie from Caucus, thanks so much, is going to put it up. And we kind of just want to get a sense of who we are. And one of the stereotypes I always have in our COP is that spiritual caregivers and faith leaders, chaplains, whatever name we give them, are the only ones who are not employed by the university. But Lena tells me there's lots of others, healthcare providers and so on, who are also have a different relationship to the university than employment. So our next poll is how many of you, we just want to, are employed by the university and or college, and how many of you have another employer? So just click away. All right. So a big part of us, a large part of us are employed by the University College, but there are a significant parts that are actually have other employers. And often I find in our COP, the people who are employed by others actually have very limited time. So maybe I'm not sure if they would have the time to come to webinars, but I think it's a great representation. So thanks so much. I should broadcast the results, should I? And end the poll. I'm learning. There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Ellie. Now, interestingly, the idea for this webinar actually started with a question on the Spirituality and Religious Pluralism Community of Practice Facebook page. And in all of our conversations, what we learned was that the Student Affairs and Services units, the landscape for us is really changing. Over the last few years, there have been a number of reorganizations and whatnot to really keep up with the evolving student needs. And the structures have adapted on many campuses to promote a more holistic wellness approach. And we see more and more student wellness centers and multi-faith centers. However, with all of these changes, many of you are here today probably feel like it would be beneficial to build stronger relationships with fellow campus professionals. And after all, our expertise and connections are the key to supporting student holistic wellness. So to keep us going and interacting, we have one more poll for you about your campus affiliation.
So we actually, first of all, we'd like to know how many of you are full-time and how many are part-time. That's another little just get to know each other thing. So I hope you can see that. Can we open that poll? And okay, it looks like the numbers run similarly to the ones about employment. Okay. So again, a majority is full-time and a few are part-time. So let's broadcast the results and end. So there we go. Perfect. And we have one more poll, Lena. Are we doing that now or in a minute?
In about a minute.
How long? Okay, so yeah, thank you.
Great. So as you can see, there are really a broad range of different sort of employment conditions on our campuses. And the connections vary greatly for both spirituality and religious professionals as well as mental health professionals. So on many campuses, spirituality and religious professionals are connected to campuses via their faith centers. They do not necessarily have an appointment with the university, and they work either full-time or part-time. But the same is true for mental health professionals. While many have full-time appointments, some work part-time, and in the case of psychiatrists, they are generally paid by the province or territory healthcare system and not the university. So, and in addition to that, you add just the complexity of where people are in their careers. If they have worked in an institution for many years or maybe just a year or less, that's the next topic for our next poll.
Okay, so we're interested in knowing how long you've been there, and we're kind of doing this in a bit more casual way, I guess. So I don't know if you've been here, if you're still counting months, if you've been there for a while, or you totally got that, or if you're someone who stopped counting and keeping track of how long you've been there. So let's get that poll up. Nicole, if you can do that, please. And there you go. So, oh, I forgot that I should vote too. Oh, there we go. All right. I always think it's interesting because I've one of the ones who stopped counting, but I always benefit a lot from new people who come in and have questions, or people who have been in other institutions and bring that experience. So this looks really interesting. It looks like almost half of us have been there just up to 5 years. So that brings an interesting dynamic to the conversation. As you know, we've seen changes in terms of mental health and spiritual practices at the university, certainly within those years as well. So, all right, thanks for that.
Thank you. And you know, Ellie and I were talking yesterday, and what we realized is that, you know, with such a diverse group of individuals working either for the university, part-time, full-time, it's really difficult to make connections. So what we have is kind of a network of communities coming together to support students. And we really feel that this will be a helpful conversation to get to know each other. And when we think about the connections between mental health and spirituality, we did take a look at some of the academic literature, and what we found was that there is evidence for there being a beneficial effect leading to an increased sense of purpose, comfort through expression, where especially related to expressing a broader range of emotions that are not always possible in an academic or work setting. And there's also evidence for increased compassion for self and others. And when we think about what the World Health Organization tries to promote in terms of preventing mental health disorders and using effective interventions, social connections always comes up. And it's so important in a religious context to have social connections, which is really, really powerful and beneficial for preventing mental health issues. And last but not least, we see that our campuses are shifting towards a holistic wellness. And earlier on the line, you might have heard us talk a little bit about the different wellness wheels. And this has certainly become a driving force to bring a lot of our campus partners together. And some have 7 spokes on the wheel, some have 8. But this one here that we like to use here at McGill and a few other campuses, we have all of these 8 coming together. And the idea being that if one is out of balance or neglected, that's going to be quite challenging, and it can be very deflating for a person to keep on going. So I think this is now time for the last poll. Am I correct, Ellie?
Yeah. So we have one more poll that leads more into our relationship. So if you're on a campus like mine at Concordia, it's really easy to just sort of live in our own bubble, do our work, and forget that there's other departments. Or you might be super cool and connected, and that sounds great. So we're just interested in gauging how you gauge your relationship. It's a judgment-free zone, so if you didn't even know that there was or don't know if there's a spirituality group on campus, that's fine. We just want to know where people are at, and the question is, which of the following best describes your relationship with the other sectors? So if you're in mental health with the spirituality interfaith center, and if you're from the interfaith part with the mental health department, or however that's offered at the university. Okay,
Right,
so
I didn't
nobody has
mention that
ever...
there's so many titles for all of these different departments. It can also be overwhelming to try to connect.
Yes, that's right. And sometimes it depends on the name. I know we have traditionally it's chaplaincy, but many places are called interfaith centers. Some have more creative names, I want to say. So, and the mental health departments too. Some are part of counseling departments, some are part of health departments. So sometimes just finding out how that service is offered can be a challenge. So, all right. Okay, so we have some great connection. 40% of people feel like they have a really great relationship, and then a lot of people do some occasional work. Also, some who might want to find out if we have the other kind of group present on campus. And also, not all campuses have a interfaith chaplaincy or multi-faith center. So that might also be something interesting to inquire about with your administration. So that's great. So we'll end the poll and broadcast the result. And thanks again for participating in all those polls. We thought it'd be a fun way to connect. Okay, now we're here to hear some stories from different campuses. And the first campus we have here is McGill. And so we have actually two folks from that. We're very lucky to hear from the two different sectors. So Carlene Gardner, who is the Director of the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, and Dr. Erin Johns, the Associate Director of Counseling. So take it away.
Okay, this is Carlene, and I guess I will start. Do I have control of the screen to advance the screen?
Give it a try, Carlene.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, good, okay.
Can I go back one? Hang on a second.
Yeah, you can stop playing it.
It's like a spoiler alert. It kept getting ahead of us.
All right. Okay, so we have one of those departmental names that's a little more creative, like Ellie was talking about, McGill Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. It's quite a mouthful, so it gets shortened to Morsel, a little bit more digestible. So I will continue along the same lines as Lena and give you a little bit of the context and how we as Morsel act on those elements. See if I can move forward one. Okay, so Morsel
Can I just interrupt? Sorry, Carlene. Yeah. We would like people to ask questions in the chat. I was supposed to say that earlier. If you have questions, write them in the chat box. We'll keep track of them, and then later there'll be a time to raise them. So thank you.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks. Morsel is one of the student services. There are 11 units, and one thing that's nice is that Morsel and Counseling actually both report up to the same executive director, so we are pretty well connected. And wellness is a priority for all of the units in student services, but it's not always reflected in the resources that get assigned to spiritual wellness. And Lena's heard me crack about this before, but the spiritual spoke on the wheel can be sometimes a little bit difficult to get visibility on with the white text on yellow. But also I think it reflects how generally sometimes the spiritual wellness is not always put in the same mix with the other health services. And this is true especially here in Quebec, which is a society that's more closed to religion and spirituality in general. And this can be really perplexing for people who come from outside, especially our international students. And we have an awful lot of those at McGill, pretty high percentage, about 30%. So how do we make these connections between spirituality and mental health in this context? I want to address 4 points really briefly and just get a little bit of an idea of how we as Morsel act within these. So one of the ways we work with counseling services and just health services in general here on campus is to collaborate but with differentiation. So we understand that we're not offering the same service. Coming to see a chaplain or a spiritual care person is not the same thing as seeing a counselor. We're certainly not trained as counselors or therapists or psychologists. So to know the limits of what your faith volunteers can offer and to be able to refer appropriately is really important. And it's really important that everybody understands that we all know where those boundaries are. It really helps us build trust with the counseling services and our other partners. The second area is we really try to understand spirituality as something more than just a private matter. spirituality deeply affects their students in their daily lives, despite the rhetoric and the narrative we hear about a very secular society. And I want to really briefly take a minute to talk about a couple of statistics that came out of last year's Angus Reid polls done in the context of Canada's 150th anniversary. And they did a lot of research on what Canadians think about religion, what Canadians believe. And it's really interesting. I've got a link here to one of the polls, but please browse through when you have some time and look at that data. I was really interested in looking at the 18 to 24-year-old age range because that reflects most of our students. And more than half of them, when asked the question, how important is faith to you when you're dealing with personal problems, more than half of our young people said either quite important or very important, right? So in the McGill context of about 40,000 students, this would be about 20,000 students who consider that faith is very important when they're dealing with something personal. So we really shouldn't be overlooking it. In terms of their day-to-day, again, the results are around 46% of young people feel that it's quite important or very important. And interestingly, about the same number respond that faith is really important to their personal identity. And we know that this can also be compounded for racialized students or students born outside of Canada. So this helps us gain a little bit of perspective to the equity issues that are involved with spirituality, religious identity, and mental health. What we're trying to do is make sure that students don't feel isolated, that they don't feel like they need to be cut off from a big part of their identity when they come here to study. So we also want to make sure that we give students resources to explore religious practices as part of their way of dealing with any kind of issue in a culturally sensitive way to help promote mental health. So we also try to educate students and advocate for harmony and diversity on the campus so that we don't have students who are getting additionally stressed out when they're already overwhelmed with academics, that they don't have additional stressors related to being marginalized for religious purposes, religious reasons. And finally, we try to create space to ask the big questions. So we also see in some of that data that young adults tend to ponder the meaning of life a little bit more frequently than older people do. And sorry, I think I've gone that forward. And they're at an age when they're making a lot of decisions. So we try to make sure that we have resources available for people to explore, to grow, to develop their faith, and to be able to tap into that part of themselves that they've identified as being important in dealing with personal problems and making major life decisions. So really, basically, all of our values, all of our practices are founded around our value of being, that we believe that you should be able to be yourself and to follow your conscience while you're here studying. And that includes talking about your faith identity. And we use a lot of our resources to promote religious and spiritual positive spaces and attitudes. And we're encouraging students on a daily basis to tend to their spiritual well-being so that we can get into that awareness and prevention aspect of mental health, and not just the crisis situations where we are using pastoral care and referrals when needed. And I guess the final thing is just one collaborative project that we're doing, inspired by a lot of things happening with counseling services during exam periods. This year we've offering some de-stress and spiritual care sessions for students. It's the first time we're doing it, and it seems to be getting some traction, to be pretty well appreciated by students. I don't want to take up more time. I want to leave time for Erin to talk about counseling, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Carlene. So I'm Erin, the Associate Director of the Counseling Service here at McGill. And so just to provide you with some context about mental health services at McGill, so we have historically worked kind of as separate units, each working on their own little piece of the pie, like Lena showed earlier. But we've recently gone through some pretty significant restructuring, and we've moved more towards a collaborative care model in our counseling service. And so for us, this means really like a collaboration between the clinicians and the students in developing wellness plans that are more holistic and looking at many different aspects of their wellness. And it also means collaboration between clinicians and community partners, both on campus and off campus. So really to us, this is a model that is a reflection of this idea that we've been talking about, that really the whole campus community should be involved in student wellness. And so it's within this context that there has really been an increased recognition among our clinicians of the importance of spirituality in supporting wellness. And also we're beginning to see an increased use of faith-based services as referral sources for us. And one example of the collaboration that Carlene already referred to a little bit is something that's actually going on right now as we speak here at McGill, which is the De-Stress During Exams programming. And so this is really, it came up, multiple different units on campus recognize that students are experiencing really a lot of stress during the exam period. And it's also a time when historically some of the services have not been as available to them. And we at the Counseling Service have been running de-stress programming during the exam period for a number of years. But this year we really got together with a few different units, including Morsel, to make sure that we coordinated our efforts and we developed some consistent messaging around the programming that was offered, and that we could take advantage of some cross-promotion. So, you know, we promote the Morsel activities on our little TV screen that we have in our counseling waiting room, and on our website and that kind of thing. So communicating, yeah, so, sorry. So, yeah, so the, yeah, so sorry, for the de-stress programming, the different units are hosting the different events themselves, but we're really hoping that the students see this as kind of all part of one initiative. And we have set it up so that some events are back-to-back. So a student might go to a counseling event, like a yoga event at the gym, and then right after that there's a Morsel event, so that we're hoping to really increase awareness across the different units. A couple of other things about collaborations. I won't get into detail about these, but I'm happy to answer questions about it. So our counseling service has gone and offered mental health first aid training at Morsel, and we've developed different referral pathways so that people can access counseling service in a more timely manner if they are meeting with a student who they are concerned about. And then just really quickly, a couple of thoughts about best practices. So communication between units, this is something that we're always working on improving, but we do try and have people from Morsel come talk to the clinicians at counseling and vice versa. And one thing that we just finished doing is we had a full 2-day-long cultural humility training for all of our clinicians at counseling. And this is, I think, a really important thing. And we really focused on being sensitive to all aspects of a person's identity, including spirituality. And then finally, at counseling within our own programming, we're really looking at different ways to incorporate spirituality-based practices into the work we do at counseling. So that involves a lot of meditation and mindfulness practices and workshops and groups. And another example is just our Living with Loss support group, which has a nice focus on spiritual questions.
And we just thought it would be helpful also to show the other poster that is circulating around these days for exam de-stress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Carlene and Erin. Our next our next presenter is Victor Thomas. Victor, the head chaplain at the Interfaith Center at Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, BC. So Victor, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. It's good to be on the call with you all. So they asked me to talk a little bit about our history and how we developed our relationship with health and counseling and sort of our setup. as well as current practices. So I am the director and head chaplain of the Interfaith Center, and we have 17 chaplains and support staff. Most of them are volunteer, what we call volunteer staff. And as a center, we're part of the department that sits under student affairs. So we report to the same executive director as health and counseling and residences and international student services. And that's been fantastic. We have over 1,400 students who weekly use our services at our main campus, and a third of those are internationals. So that's a little bit of our setup and who's using our center. About 10 years ago, I think perhaps health and counseling and the Interfaith Center were not connected very well. And our story really is in some ways kind of simple. It's just relationship building between myself and a new director who came in, which led to meeting the counselors. And certainly we had to deal with questions over time like uncertainty about what we do, just sort of awareness. And maybe also the counselors, you know, are you just there to convert people? And these are good questions. And our staff, most of them, the chaplains, have been around for more than 10 years and deeply care about the students and want the best for them. And I think as we spoke and realized we both are trying to support students, that develops a really good relationship between the two units. Also, SFU's had the wellness wheel for a while. Perhaps initially that spirituality component was sort of left, but that as the relationship's been built, I really think it's a sort of a more equal part of that wheel. And another part sort of to this history is that initially a person in my role, the head chaplain, but now I sort of have a chaplain and director role. I wasn't represented at the student affairs meetings, but that's now part of it for about the last 6 years. And I think that helped build a lot of good relationships. So today, we have a healthy campus model and trying to support all of us, different units, trying to support student success. From the chaplains, we'll refer students, recognizing, as I was mentioned earlier, our limits as well as our strengths, and really see ourselves as like, you know, part of the frontline workers meeting students. And on occasion, because we have good relationships, that means walking students across to health and counseling, or student is in real severe distress, I might even give a little call and just say, hey, I'm coming across with somebody, and then somebody on the other side might be available and ready to take the person in. So I think really key is building a strong relationship, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses. And certainly one of the strengths we have is we have, as I mentioned, on the Burnaby campus, 1,400 students, or just over that, weekly using the center, and 116 weekly group meetings of some type that take place on the main campus. So there's a lot of activity. There's always lots of food in chaplaincy work, a lot of fun. And so I think Health and Counseling has seen that as a strength in connecting students and perhaps who have been isolated just into some community. And certainly I think some of the work we do as in the chaplaincy actually really it's a lot of preventative stuff in terms of creating, there being communities and places for people to have connections and do life together. And so I think these days health and counseling will sometimes see, if this person has a faith background, see that as a positive piece that they can use in trying to support students, and would probably try and connect the students to ourselves. And we'll try and support them too. And so really just more of a holistic approach of supporting students. There's actually also a guide that was developed by Health and Counseling about supporting students in distress. It was made for faculty and staff, and it sort of says, if you know, observe these certain actions, mild to moderate or moderate to severe, and you have some questions you could ask, and then part of the referring, say mild to moderate concern, would say, hey, refer them to the Interfaith Center or academic advising. So really just trying to integrate the units to better support our students' success. And also where it's coming a lot, I think our partnership is around student deaths when they've taken place. Just providing supports, or sometimes it might be a group sort of counseling session, and then normally a chaplain will go along and be present to be part of that debriefing time, whether it's in residences or on the campus. And so really, I think a partnership together these days is really beneficial for the students. And in fact, we also have a lot of staff and faculty that might come in for more pastoral counseling. And although this is really about to do with particularly health and counseling, we also really partner very closely, and so does health and counseling, with International Student Services. A lot of international students are coming with faith backgrounds, disabilities, Indigenous Student Center, residences. It's really a joint approach to caring for students. And certainly we've got lots more to learn, and I'm excited to see some of this presentation, but definitely great using our strengths and relying on each other. So that's a little bit about what's happening at Simon Fraser.
Great, thanks, Victor. And I know there have been questions coming in, so if you are one of the presenters and want to answer them in the chat, that's fine. But I am collecting them, and we will raise them after Calvary has spoken. So Calvary, I don't know how you say your last name, De Jong, and he is. Say that again.
De
Jong. Okay, Calvary De Jong was on the Student Association of Red River College, and now is also working with the Multi-Faith Center, I believe at the University of Saskatchewan, on the proposal committee for the center. So let's hear from you, Calvary.
The Multi-Faith Center proposal is for Red River College.
I'm sorry.
Saskatoon. There had been on campus at Red River College a Christian chaplaincy model dating back to the 90s, but in 2013 it was actually phased out. And so with the recognition that religious and spiritual life is an important part of the student experience, we've been working with some community partners to bring forward a multi-faith center proposal to the college, and it's been actually fairly well received by the Students Association, and they've been helping us with doing some student surveys to look at the student support for that sort of initiative. What I want to maybe touch on today is this is the wellness wheel that actually comes from Red River College. I talk about developing a framework for institutional programming based on the wellness wheel. Actually, like the other wellness wheel that they showed earlier has 8 sections. This one only has 7. But as the campus, we deploy programming and allocate resources. Right. So we have a gym and fitness classes on campus. We have student events and clubs for students to mingle and socialize. Interest-based clubs and classwork for students to explore their intellectual endeavors. And so within the institutional model of wellness, there is the recognition of spirituality. And so on campus at Red River, there's an Indigenous elders residence on campus, which is fantastic. But as far as meeting the needs of the diverse needs on campus, not every program will meet the need for all of the students, but a diversity of programs can meet the diverse needs of the student population on campus. And so at Red River College, we have significant representation of students from overseas. And so a lot of students come from a religious or faith tradition from a non-Western perspective, and then as well as domestic students as well. And so part of our question as we've been going through this process of engaging the institution as well as the counseling departments has been, so what do you do within your department to support spiritual life for students on campus? And so starting with a question has been an effective way to start to engage those conversations and to look for those intersections. So with the Student Association, we've been able to engage with help facilitate partnerships with different groups on campus. And so one example would be we've actually co-funded through the Student Association a mental health coordinator on campus. And there has been some talk about providing some support for the Multi-Faith Center moving ahead with that as well. And so then there's opportunity for intersections to deploy programming in collaboration. So I know that October is Mental Health Awareness Week, and so student unions are often allocating some funding to help provide services for students. And so then that would be an opportunity to look at maybe bringing in, like a yoga class or even a yogi to actually give a presentation that would intersect with the physical of having, a yoga class with the emotional piece of being able to relax, as well as the spiritual expression by having someone to share from that perspective. And so there's a hidden partner, potential partner on campus. Most of our campuses have we have clubs, and there's a lot of faith-based clubs that have professional staff working in the background doing leadership training and development. They generally are not operating through the Multi-Faith Center because they don't have an appointment, but those people are potential. They are there as a resource for students, and so I would like to see more engagement with those people on campus. One of the challenges is that because they aren't appointed by the campus, they don't necessarily know the infrastructure of the campus and how to get connected, and so it would be helpful to see some multi-faith leaders doing some engagement with those folks on campus as well. So that's a little bit of my experience, and then a little bit of what I'd share from the Wellness Wheel that we've been using at River College. Thanks much.
Great, thanks, Calvary. So we have 3 different campuses, lots of commonalities, but also different approaches, and we have several questions here. So we now have questions for our speakers, and there were several that were already asked. One of the questions that was asked of Morsel was whether you're there's a perception that you're more involved in equity and advocacy than in spiritual counseling. Do you want to comment on that, Erin or Carlene?
I can comment on that. So we do offer spiritual counseling through our team of volunteers. We don't have any paid chaplains on staff. So we work with volunteers from different faith denominations who, approach us and want to offer some form of campus ministry. And they go through a vetting process with us. So we do offer that service through volunteers, but not through paid staff. But one of the things that's really struck us is that, when Lena was talking, wellness is often one of the things at the heart of wellness is connection, right? Connection and feeling good about yourself and being in tune with your identity. So this is where that equity piece comes in terms of allowing students to really embrace 100% of their identity, and particularly for students who come from minority faiths here in Canada. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but we definitely do both. But we see the equity piece as engaging in that broader question and getting to some of that awareness and prevention, so that students don't end up in crisis for reasons of discrimination.
Okay, great. Thank you. Please type away in the chat if you want to add to the conversation or if you have other questions. One interesting question I heard, and I can relate in a bit because I'm also on a commuter-based campus. There's a question in Calgary about the colleges in Manitoba being mainly commuter-based, and here at Concordia we are like that as well. So I'm interested if you have any perspective on how you would provide that that spiritual care in that context. Calvary, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Well, if you want a litmus test for how intense the commuter culture is at our primary campus in Notre Dame, the Student Association does their CAGR events in the afternoons because you put fear you can't get the students back after hours. Lunch hours. That's where it needs to go.
Okay.
It's kind of been that simple.
Good to know.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because we don't even have a lunch hour. I'm at Concordia. We have over 45,000 students, and we have classes from 8 o'clock till 11:45 or something, and there's no lunch break. But we just find, we play at the Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center, we have different roles, and I might talk to one group about more of the advocacy, equity question, another group more about the spiritual care. For a lot of students, it's having a place to hang out, to be, not needing a reason to show up. They don't need to come with a question. They can just come because. I think so. We have tell different stories to different people, and too with the commuter thing in our campus, it's we sort of pull out a net or throw out a net and hope that some of the different things we offer speaks to some students and to many students, and something else speaks to other students. So to me, it's kind of funny because I wouldn't know how to do the work I do in a residence campus. So I think that's what makes the work so interesting. So I'd love to hear from some others about how you approach that. There was another question about intake. So this was my storyteller hat. Now I have my sort of moderator hat on again. Question about pastoral counseling intake forms, and also one for the spiritual caregivers. Whether you do pastoral counseling intake form, and another question whether the mental health folks do a spiritual assessment as part of your intake form. So I don't know who of the speakers would like to respond to that.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. It's Erin from McGill. Here at McGill, we currently don't have any kind of guidelines about how to ask about spirituality in the intake, but it was something that definitely came up as a question during our cultural humility training that I referenced earlier. So much so that we're actually having the people who came to facilitate the training come back for a planning meeting with our staff, and we're going to ask them, we're going to actually go step by step through our procedures, and we're going to ask them how can we integrate what we learned about in the cultural humility training into our intake process and into our, even our therapy process and even into the paperwork, and we're going to really look at how we can do really a better job of that, because many, and we found through the training as well that, our clinicians had really variable comfort levels in talking about spirituality with it, and others were really not so comfortable. So we want to find ways that we can help the ones who are less comfortable, give them ways that they can ask about it and talk about it.
Thanks, Erin. That sounds great. There's great conversation happening in the chat. That's great. I am also aware of the time. It's almost 2 o'clock. We're almost at the end of our time. So if any, not Erin, Lena, do you have, would you like to add something, or Tayab?
This is Sayab. I'm so thankful to LAU and everyone else who participated. Wonderful. I think the stories from campuses were very compelling. And as I said, there are many ways of dealing any stressful situation. And I think we can probably safely say that we underutilize the spiritual aspects, although I think almost everyone on this call will agree that we are meaning-making creatures, and spirituality is a great way to invoke that. Alina, you have any comment? Thank you so much for wonderful presentations.
I just think it's been such an engaging hour, and it feels like the conversation has only just begun. So there might be a part 2 coming soon.
Yes, and we'd love to know if you have follow-up questions, or if you would like to, have other ideas for a webinar. And I guess the one thing I just want to end with too is, Victor, you talked a lot about relation building, and the question I would have asked is, were there ever any stereotypes of each other you have to overcome? And so I want to encourage all of us to sort of talk to each other, find out about your spirituality, multi-faith center, whatever you have on your campuses, and get to know them. I know when I walk around and people hear about what we do, they go, oh, I thought, you just do prayers or do, religious programming, but we really, our main goal, just like the mental health practitioners, is to provide a good experience for the students, and to help them succeed in their education. And I think the same is true for me as a spiritual care practitioner. I often have stereotypes of mental health practitioners. And so for me, the relationship building is really the key in the beginning. And this is what we did today. So thank you very much for that. For participating, hopefully maybe at the caucus meeting in PI, we'll have more time to share and to talk about that. And maybe we'll offer another webinar in the future. So thank you so very much for being there, for participating, listening, and for doing the work you do on all of your campuses across the country.